Hello, we're back. This is the afternoon stream of Massachusetts versus Karen Reed. It's been a long day. Sgt Goode is on the stand. He's telling about the 911 call and how he is being dispatched to the scene of the crime. So let's just jump right into it. If I can remember what button to push. And I think it's this button. It's this button. Yeah, it's that button. And I just have to go hit play. A little bit of the fan. It shouldn't be too long. Okay, here we go. The stand.
Sir, I'll remind you, you're still under oath. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Sergeant, resuming with what's just been marked as Exhibit 41, that's the cruiser camera video from your cruiser 682 that you were driving that day. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish some of that video.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if you could start from the beginning through about 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Oh, his windshield wipers work. You can't really tell for sure, but I believe it's been plowed. Yeah, it's been plowed. Don't know where we are yet.
Can you pause it just 1 second? Sergeant, if you could, as the video is playing along, if you could, just alert the jury to the portion of the video where you observe yourself sort of pulling on to Fairview Road.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, when the Sergeant does that, if you could just pause it at that time. Okay.
Yeah, by this time, the snowplows had been active. But when the incident occurred, there was hardly any snow. So everything is on top, supposedly. And you can see there's what looks like there's snow along the edge where the plow has gone, and in the middle. It's just not repeated tire tracks. So snow plows had been busy. Why do they have to do this? I don't understand.
All right, we're coming up to Fairview right now.
Will he be turning right or left?
Spring, then next one up. That's Fairview right there on the right.
Pause it just then. Sergeant Goode, if I could take you back just to the right that you took just before that. What street are you on right now?
That's Chapman Street.
And was that Washington Street that you would turn to get onto Chapman?
Correct.
Can I ask you, when you're turning from Washington Street onto Chapman, are there any sort of businesses or sort of landmarks on your right or your left as you're making that turn?
So on the right-hand side, as you're turning onto Chapman, that's going to be Cassie's Corner Store. And on the left at the intersection is used to be called Temple Beth Abraham. I believe it's Temple Binbar something. I don't know the actual name, but
So there's a temple on your left and Cassie's on your right.
They've got
Correct.
video from Temple.
And so at this
The
point, the
prosecutor
video
does.
here is about when you're about to turn on to Fifth, correct?
yes.
Why, I don't know. I just saw it on that screen when they were playing other stuff, when I was being nosy. The snow's coming down good now. 6:15. That's quite a ways down. I thought it was like he was close to the corner, was where the house was. Okay, we see the lights now. Coming from the other way, it must be close to the corner. So there's the fire truck. There's the ambulance. It hasn't left yet. I think that is this Karen? I'm not sure.
Go to Winter.
Yes.
But she's one of those people.
It was.
So, sir, sorry, there's a pointer.
Okay.
If I could, Sergeant, just ask you to, within this sort of still frame up here on the screen, do you recognize people that are depicted within this still frame of this video?
Yes.
And if, to whatever extent you do recognize people, if you could, using the laser pointer, draw the jury's attention to whom you recognize.
All right. That's going to be myself. Right there is going to be firefighter McLaughlin. That's going to be Miss Reed. And if you played it another second, I believe that's going to be Miss McCabe, or if not, Miss Roberts.
Wait a minute. I thought we were watching this with his dash cam. I'm confused.
Ms. Gilman, if you could.
Yes, that's Karen.
The gentleman you see sort of behind you in the frame, Sergeant, do you recognize who that is?
Yes, that's Officer Sarif.
My apologies, Ms. Gilman. You can run. You can take that down. Thank you very much.
Okay, so he was at the scene.
And so, Sergeant, you arrive on scene in that area. First of all, what's contained in that video, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed as far as the weather conditions outside that day?
Yes.
And when you arrive on scene, who, if anyone, is it that you speak to first?
Initially, I walked up to Officer Sarif. I said probably some version of what's going on. Officer O'Keefe was already in the ambulance, and then I just began to try to talk to anybody and anybody.
And so the ambulance is still on scene when you arrive, is that correct?
Yes.
Officer O'Keefe is in the back of the ambulance, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
And at some point when you're speaking with Officer Sarif, does he direct your attention to where Officer O'Keefe was prior to being placed in the ambulance?
Yes.
Where did he direct your attention?
If you're looking at the house, it'd be left-hand side, slightly probably right in front of the flagpole.
And about how far off of the roadway would you estimate that was?
I would say 8 to 10 feet off the curb.
Speaking to other people without reference to necessarily what was said to you, Following your conversation with Officer Saraf, who, if anyone, you speak to next?
I believe the first person I could really get a statement from was Miss McCabe.
And when you say first person you could really get a statement from, what do you mean by that?
It was a chaotic scene. People were just kind of walking in and out. And so Miss McCabe was the first one that was able to give me a good statement of how they ended up here.
Following your conversation with Miss McCabe, who, if anyone, do you speak to next?
Next was Miss Reed.
And just to be clear, when we speak about Miss Reed, you see her in the courtroom today?
I do.
Just identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing.
She's sitting between Mr. Jackson and Mr. Yannetti.
I'll just ask the record reflect identification.
Okay.
Now, when you're on scene and you're speaking to these individuals, what if any impact did the weather have as far as your ability to sort of hear things that weren't direct conversations you were involved with?
You couldn't hear. It was oddly eerily quiet, but the wind was so howling that I had a tough time actually hearing people. So you had to speak very loud or get next to each other.
And as far as your conversation with the defendant, Ms. Reed, what, if anything, did you ask her, or what, if any, response did she give?
So I walked Ms. Reed to the back of 682. She was obviously cold. Got her in the back of the car, put the heat on, asked her, how did she end up here? How did her boyfriend end up here? She says, I don't know.
Prior to placing her in the back of the cruiser, how would you describe her sort of demeanor outside?
Confused,
Agitated.
hysterical, shock.
What, if anything, was she saying or asking in regard to Mr. O'Keefe prior to you putting her in the back of the cruiser?
She was yelling out, is he dead?
And is that something she said once, more than once, or something?
Numerous times.
About how loudly was she saying?
Oh, she was yelling it.
And so once back in the cruiser, you asked her some questions after she said, I don't know. What, if anything else, did you ask her then?
I asked her if she had driven there, and she said, I think so. And then right after that, she said, I don't remember. Because of her state, I decided to stop questioning there. She couldn't keep her train of thought.
Mentally, she was bouncing around, trying to comprehend what the hell was going on.
Notified Detective Sergeant Lank and Lieutenant Gallagher prior to you going to the scene, is that correct?
Yes.
About what time was it that either or both of them arrived?
Detective Sergeant Lank probably got there at about 6:20, 6:25. I immediately briefed him what we had, what was going on so far. And
about what time did Lieutenant Gallagher arrive?
I believe Lieutenant Gallagher probably came in right around 7 a.m.
Now, following your conversation with the defendant, who, if anyone else, did you speak to on?
Then I spoke to the other party, Miss Roberts.
And if you know, about how long a period of conversation are we talking about with respect to Ms. McCabe and Ms. Roberts?
Each interview?
Yes.
Couple minutes.
And why was it only a couple minutes?
It was a pretty quick statement. It seemed like they were only in the car for a very short amount of time.
Move to strike.
All right. So we'll strike after. It was a pretty quick statement. Next question.
Now, with regard to Lieutenant Ms. Reed, after you had that brief conversation with her in the back of your cruiser, where did you go from? Where did she go from there?
I believe she, at some point, we let her back outside of the car. We never closed the door on her because I was stood in the door frame with my head in the back seat. She got out. She kind of just did her own thing, paced up and back between talking to either Miss Roberts or Miss McCabe, yelling out.
And at some point, did the ambulance and Miss Officer O'Keefe was in, did that leave the scene?
It did.
And following that, what, if anything, did you say or do with reference to the defendant, Ms. Reed?
Once the Officer O'Keefe was transported, Miss Reed just was not listening to any directions. We were trying to keep her in Miss Roberts' car to stay warm. She's going back and forth. I finally told Miss Roberts, we have everybody's information. She's not needed here anymore. Go home, get warm. We'll reach out if we have to.
So
and
he released her.
shortly after, and at that point, did Miss Roberts take Miss Reed?
She did.
And what, if anything, happened next on scene with regard to Ms. Reed?
It was moments later. I got a radio transmission from our officer at the working dispatch that Mr. Reed, her father, was on the phone with Miss Reed, and she was making suicidal threats to take her own life.
And based on that information that you received, what, if anything, did you do in regard to that?
Well, once our officer Deborah, who didn't even know that we had Miss Reed at the scene, she radioed to us to confirm that did we have a Karen party on scene. I said we did. She explained that her father was frantic on the phone, and Miss Reed was stating that she wanted to end her life, and he, in quotes, said he wanted her to be in protective custody. So at that time, I knew that we'd be able to get a hold of her because I had all the information. I believe I just called Miss Roberts' phone, told her to bring her back to the scene.
And about how long was it after you spoke to Ms. Roberts that they returned to the scene?
They couldn't have gotten very far, especially in the road conditions.
And then based on those statements that were reported to you from the dispatch from defendant's father, what, if anything, did you do with regard to Ms. Reed?
I told Officer Mullaney, who was on scene, most of our patrolmen have, it's called the Section 12 paperwork inside of all of our cruisers, just for that reason. I advised him to fill out the proper paperwork, and we were going to section Miss Reed to the hospital for mental evaluation.
And what is a Section 12 from your perspective?
It's a tool for police officers when you come on scene with someone that's having either a mental breakdown, claiming that they want to hurt themselves, anything like that. We have the power as police officers to fill out the proper paperwork. We're not medical professionals. Let a doctor determine if she does need medical help. And if she doesn't want to go, or him, that paperwork allows us to actually physically put her on a stretcher and send her to the hospital. Once she gets to the hospital, it's up to the doctors there to do their due diligence. And if they deem that she's not mentally unstable, then she's released, but at least it's off of us.
Now, the time that Ms. Reed returns to the scene, the fire department, being the ambulance and the engine, have already left. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And that apparatus from the fire department come back in reference to Section 12.
Correct. So I believe this group was from Station 2, which is the other fire station in the town of Canton. They arrived on scene.
And during that time in between, who arrives first, the fire department or Ms. Roberts with Ms. Reed?
Miss Roberts.
And during that time, after Ms. Roberts arrives with Ms. Reed and prior to the fire department arriving, what, if any, interaction did you have with Ms. Reed during that time?
None.
And then once the fire department returns on scene, what, if anything, do you direct them to with regard to Ms. Reed and with regard to the paperwork you had Officer Mullaney fill out? Officer
Mullaney and Officer Sarif, and looks like in the video, escort Miss Reed to the ambulance, and she's safely transported to the hospital. Our officer back at dispatch called back Mr. Reed, advised her that his daughter was safe.
And then turning back to the scene, following Detective Sergeant Lank's arrival, where, if anywhere, did you and Detective Sergeant Lank go on scene following that?
So when we were waiting for the fire truck to arrive, we noticed that the lights went on at 34 Fairview. We needed to obviously speak to the homeowners. I told Sergeant Lank at the time, I believe he was on the phone with CPAC for the state police. I said, the lights just went on the front door. Let's go speak to the homeowners. And we both walked in.
You actually physically walked into the house, is that correct?
Yes.
With respect to prior to you seeing sort of the house lights go on at 34 Fairview, had you seen anybody go into or out of that residence while you were there?
Yes. At some point, either myself or Sergeant Lank told Ms. McCabe that she needs to wake up the homeowners. We need to speak to them.
And why did you say that specifically to Ms. McCabe?
We have no idea why John O'Keefe is laying on the front lawn of a house. We have no idea. The statements from the three people.
Well, why ask her?
Need to figure out what happened that night.
And so I guess my question is more, why Ms. McCabe versus somebody else?
Ms. McCabe is the sister-in-law of the homeowner, so she would be a friendly face to knock at the door at 6 o'clock in the morning in a blizzard.
Now, beyond anybody at 34 Fairview Road, again, before you observe those lights go on.
She went in earlier.
From the other
Somebody
houses
did.
sort of on the street up and down, who, if anyone, did you observe come out of any of those houses?
Nobody.
And was that something that you about the time that you were on scene?
Correct.
So how long were you on scene for in total?
Looking at the log, we were there for almost exactly 2 hours.
And so during those 2 hours, no one from any of the houses on the street came outside?
No, I mean, every emergency truck that showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning during a blizzard, there's no other cars on the road. So you're not coming down with sirens blaring, waking up an entire street, a neighborhood. There's no need for it. So it was just lights and flashing. And to be honest with you, you couldn't see very far.
So you and Detective Sergeant Lank go into the home at 34 Fairview, and who, if anyone, did you speak to in
Mr. Albert, Mrs. Albert, Brian, and Nicole.
And who, if anyone else, was present in the home when you spoke with them?
When I was in there, I know Jen was in there, but we didn't speak to her because we already spoke to her. But we just spoke to Brian and Nicole right in the front room.
Now, you heard over the course of the 911 call from Ms. McCabe that she references that 34 Fairview is the Albert residence, correct?
Yes.
And did you know Brian Albert, or were you aware of who he was prior to going to the house that day?
I know of Brian Albert, yes.
And how did you know?
He's a brother of a coworker that I've worked with for 18 years.
And coworker that you worked with for 18 years, who's that?
Detective Albert.
What's his first name?
Kevin.
And had you ever been to that house before?
No.
You ever been inside that house before?
No.
And when you go inside that day, it's Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and Ms. McCabe, is that correct?
Yes.
And during the time that you were in there, do you recall seeing, or who, if anyone else, do you recall seeing in there besides those three people, yourself and Detective Sergeant?
Nobody. Detective Lank took the lead on speaking to Brian and Nicole Albert, and I kind of just moseyed in the front of the house, looked in the dining room, and listened to what they said, what happened. They seemed like they were generally in shock that there was a
objection.
So, sustain. Next question, please.
What, if anything, did you observe about their demeanor when you spoke?
They looked like they just got woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Good answer.
And as far as you indicating that you're sort of looking or poking around the front area near the front door, correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, of note did you observe inside the house when you did?
Nothing. Everything to be in order. It seemed like a normal house.
And following, if you know, about how long was that conversation in the house?
I would say 20, 25 minutes.
And following that conversation, where did you and Detective Sergeant Lank go?
At that time, we both left the residence, came outside, and at that time, Lieutenant Gallagher was arriving. We had like a little bit of a powwow, figured out what was going on, and I believe that's when we saw Jen McCabe's husband show up and walked in. And
again, you didn't know Jennifer McCabe prior to that day, correct?
No.
Did you know her husband prior to that day? So after you saw her husband, who you now know to be your husband, walk in, what, if anything, did you and Detective Sergeant Lank?
Sergeant Lank ran back inside to get a statement from Mr. McCabe as well.
Did you go with him as well?
I did not.
And after you have sort of the conversation between yourself, Detective Sergeant Lank, and Lieutenant Gallagher, what, if anything, did the three of you do from there?
Lieutenant Gallagher immediately said we need to seal off the area of where Officer Keith was located. We grabbed some crime scene tape, put around. He wanted to photograph the area as well.
And
At some point,
who, if
the three
anyone,
of them
grabbed
went
the
back
crime
in.
scene?
Myself.
And what, if anything, did you do?
I wrapped it around probably the flagpole, tree, and cruiser. It was hard to keep up just because the wind was blowing at such a good rate.
And then what, if anything, did you and the other officers do with respect to the area that was identified to you as where Mr. O'Keefe was on Officer Sarah's ride?
Lieutenant Gallagher noticed that the snow was coming down at such a good clip, we couldn't keep it clear, and he made the idea of anybody have a leaf blower, and I did. So I told him I'm not too far away from the house, so I shot back to my residence and grabbed my own.
And about how long a period of time was it between the time that you sort of left to go get the leaf blower and the time that you arrived back?
No more than 5-7 minutes.
And once you arrived back at back in the area of 34 Fairview Road, what, if anything, happened there?
I started it up for Lieutenant Gallagher. He took it over, and it worked great.
A little bit of pride
Now,
there.
with respect to that sort of implementation of the leaf blower, what, if anything, did you or other officers do to sort of memorialize?
So as Lieutenant Gallagher was using the piece of equipment, I used my iPhone, videotaped it, and took two still photos.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I actually don't need to approach. Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit number 33 up on the screen. Just the first one. Sgt Goode, have you seen what's up on the screen as exhibit 33 before?
Yes.
And what do you recognize as?
That's Lieutenant Gallagher.
And what, if anything, does Lieutenant Gallagher have in his hand at the time in this particular time?
The leaf blower?
And what's depicted on the screen, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you memorialized on scene that day with respect to the leaf blower?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just run just this one video.
Snow's not very deep there. The shoes aren't sinking in very far.
Right there. Now, with respect to using that leaf blower on scene, Sergeant, what, if anything, did you observe in the snow when that was used to blow away sort of the layers?
It exposed the blood and small drinking glass broken.
And do you see those items in what's frozen up on the screen right now?
I do.
If you could, using that laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to where you observe each of those items in this video.
So that's the glass right there. And then all the blood droplings.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can take it.
Which Karen might have dropped after she gave him CPR.
Now, prior to using the leaf blower, what, if anything, did Lieutenant Gallagher instruct you and any other officers to do with regard to your cruisers that were parked on scene?
We needed to move them out of the way. He wanted to be able to get a good shot of the area, so we kind of closed off the road. And
Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit 41 back up again. Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to fast forward on this to about 40 minutes and 30 seconds into. Good pause it right there. Now, Sergeant Goode, what's up on the screen? Is that the point that you are referencing now as far as about to move your cruiser for that purpose?
this was early when we moved out of the way of the ambulance, I believe.
Fine.
Oh, no, could be right.
Regardless, you recognize this?
Not sure.
Yes, sorry. If you just play it forward, I'll know.
I'm sorry. Can you
Just play it forward, I guess.
Ms. Gilman, if you could, I'd like to play this through. So about 41 minutes and 12 seconds or so. But if you could just pause it real quick, I'm sorry. Sergeant, at some point when you move this cruiser, what, if anything, you're able to see in this footage of the front lawn area of 34 Fairview?
So my cruiser camera pans the front yard of 34 Fairview, and it shows the snow undisturbed. No footprints, any tracks, anything like that leading anywhere.
And if you could just speak up when we get to that point, and Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause it on that area.
Looks like Karen does not want to leave the body. Leave her boyfriend.
You could pause it right there. Now, the area that you were speaking about before, is this sort of the portion of the video?
Yes.
And using the laser pointer,
Can't even tell where the body was.
the portion of the yard that you were talking about in indication of no
I should just say
footprints or anything
O'Keefe
that you
was.
observed in that snow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Gilman, if you could just let it run through for a couple more.
It's not proving anything.
Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can stop. And Ms. Gilman, you can take it down. Now, Sergeant Goode, you had spoke about as well some photographs that were taken to memorialize the area of where Mr. O'Keefe was found. Is that correct?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Somebody has sinus issues.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. That's if you, first, just if you recognize it.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
That is 34 Fairview.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 8 up on the screen.
Exhibit 8. Not more dash cam, please.
What's up on the screen? Is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed on scene that day?
Yes.
That's
I
almost
could
as
ask you
bad.
to flip forward in that book before you to Exhibit number 10.
Okay.
And Ms. Gilman, if we could have Exhibit 10. And Sergeant, what's up on the screen? Is that what you have before you with Exhibit 10?
Yes.
And similarly, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
That is a scene where our officers and the witnesses found Officer O'Keefe.
And if you could, using that laser pointer you have before you direct the jury's attention to where you were directed to where Mr. O'Keefe was found.
Objection, hearsay.
Yeah,
No, I'll allow that.
Go ahead, sir.
could be anywhere in there.
Now, sir, if I could ask you to flip forward in that book just a little bit more to what's been marked as Exhibit 20A.
Okay.
Because he didn't physically, that's hearsay, because he didn't himself see Mr. O'Keefe there.
If you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 20.
Yes, that's the curving.
And as far as the curving is concerned, how is it sort of cleared off in this particular area?
We'd have to kick it off with our shoe to clear it off so we could actually see it, make a mark of it.
And again, that area that you were directed to, as far as where Mr. O'Keefe was found, you observed that in this photograph, exhibit 28 as well?
Yes.
You could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to where in this photograph that is. Okay. May I approach this to...
Yes.
It's so sloppy. Because was that blood from where she was doing CPR? So the body would be further over? I mean, come on.
The last thing, I'm just going to show you what's been marked as exhibit 27. Sergeant, do you recognize that?
I do.
Ms. Gilman, if we could have 27 on the screen. And Sergeant Goode, what's up on the screen as, and before you as exhibit 27? Sorry, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit 27?
Yes.
And if you could describe to the jury what we're looking at in this.
That's what I say.
So we have the blood, and then right here is the broken drinking glass that was located.
That doesn't look much different than the other one on the far right.
May I approach just to retrieve?
Yes.
The importance of the broken drinking glass. My understanding is the prosecution is saying it's the same glass he was seen drinking from in the bar, where they left the bar and they went to this residence because there was an after party from drinking at the bar. And that's where he was dropped off. Now, prosecution is saying that that's when there was an altercation between him and his girlfriend, and still having the drink in hand. That's why they say that that's the glass from the bar, and that he never actually went inside. So I will be interested to see if the defense gets a hold of the type of drinking glasses that they get, take one, get one from the bar, and compare it to the remains of that drinking glass and see if it's a match. Because they never went inside, according to what's been testified so far, to see if there were other glasses that were similar to that in the residence, because they didn't have a search warrant. So they couldn't do anything like that. They also say somewhere, I don't know if it's from something else that I've been watching that I shouldn't be watching, but I'm a snarky juror, so I have leeway. Anyway, they also say that in the jacket that he was wearing, there is crushed glass from that glass that they identify as being from the bar in his jacket, that proves that she ran into him. And it's embedded in the jacket. Somebody could also take the jacket with a hammer, put that glass, and smash it in there and falsify evidence, which is what I think happened. But who am I? Okay, back to what they're doing.
I may have just a moment here.
Yes.
He's got to go get coached on what to say next. Or if he missed anything. Yes, I'm being snarky. Where do you think the name came
Following
from?
the time on scene that morning, sir, where did you go from there?
Once we cleared 34 Fairview, I returned to the Canton Police Department.
And the items that you were talking about as far as the blood, which believed to be blood droplets in the snow and the piece of a cocktail blast, what, if anything, did you or other officers do with regard to that?
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Detective Sergeant Lank transported those back to the police department.
Again, just one moment, Sean.
Okay.
You have any idea
I
what?
have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank
All right.
God.
Stianetti?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Maybe we'll get some real interesting stuff now. Maybe not.
Good afternoon, Sergeant.
Afternoon.
Sir, you and I have never met, correct?
No,
We've never spoken.
no,
Excuse me again.
Sergeant Goode, you grew up in Canton?
I did.
You attended Canton Public Schools?
I did.
Excuse me.
Graduated from Canton High School?
I did.
That would have been in 1998?
Yes.
Is it true that in your graduating class was somebody named Courtney Proctor?
Yes.
You knew Courtney Proctor?
Yes.
You knew her to be Michael Proctor's sister, correct?
Yes.
Also in your graduating class was somebody named Jill Daniels, correct?
Yes.
You knew her, or you now know her, to be Christopher Albert's sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
Christopher Albert is married to Jill Daniels' sister, correct?
Yes.
And you know Christopher Albert as Brian Albert's brother, correct?
Yes.
So it is fair to say that you graduated high school with Michael Proctor's sister and Christopher Albert's sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
And, growing up in Canton and, working for 18 years as a Canton police officer, you're well familiar with the Albert family of Canton, correct?
I work with one of them.
You know that the Albert family is a well-known family in Canton, correct?
Sure.
The Albert family is well connected to the town of Canton, correct?
I don't know what you mean by connected. They live in Canton. Yes.
All right, well, Christopher Albert is a Canton town selectman, is he not?
Yes.
And you've already established that Kevin Albert is a Canton police officer, correct?
Yes.
And you already testified that you knew Brian Albert as well, and you knew that he was a Boston police officer who lived in Canton, correct?
Yes.
In fact, he and his family lived at 34 Fairview in Canton, correct?
Yes.
You also knew that his family had been there for years. Before Brian Albert owned the house, his parents owned it, correct?
Yes.
Now, as of January 28th of 2022,
High visibility.
who among the Albert family did you know either personally or professionally?
Professionally is Kevin Albert.
Okay, and what about personally?
I knew Chris.
And you know that Christopher Albert, in addition to being a town selectman, also owns a pizza place in Canton, correct?
Yes, he does.
What's the name of that pizza place?
That'd be D&E.
And have you eaten there before?
Yes,
You've seen Christopher Albert there before?
I have.
Now, on January 29th of 2022, you learned at approximately 6 a.m. that John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's front lawn, correct?
Yes.
And as of January 29th of 2022, you knew that Brian Albert at that time, of course, was the brother of your fellow Canton police officer, Kevin Albert, correct?
Yes.
And how long have you known Kevin Albert for?
As long as I worked at the Canton Police Department.
And that is approximately 18 years?
Coming up in 18 years, yes.
He's not sidestepping.
Is Kevin Albert
That's
older or younger than you or around the same age?
He's older than me.
By how many years, if you know?
I don't. Probably
Approximately?
5 years?
Have you ever shared a patrol car with Kevin Albert?
No.
Have you ever worked on an investigation or a case with Kevin Albert?
I probably have. Yeah.
In addition to being a colleague, would you also consider Kevin Albert to be a friend?
Yeah, we've socially hung out after work.
And because he is a fellow Canton police officer, you'd expect that he would have your back in a crisis, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, I'll let him have it.
I hope he would defend me while working. Yes, he's a police officer.
You would certainly protect him in a crisis, correct?
At work, when we're police officers, yes.
Sure. Well, even out of work, if he was in a crisis, you'd probably help, correct?
I don't know what you're asking.
No.
Well, there is the teamwork that is part and parcel of being a police officer with your fellow officers, correct?
Sure.
It's a dangerous job.
Sure.
You need to have each other's back.
Sure.
You need to depend on your fellow officers, correct?
Sure.
And it's been said there's a brotherhood among police officers, correct?
To a fact.
And, when you meet another police officer, he or she will tell you that they're, quote, on the job, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection sustained.
That I didn't understand.
And in terms of, depending on your fellow officers, you're taught all this beginning in the police academy, correct?
Objection.
No, he can have that.
What am I taught?
Well, I'm asking you. With regard to the teamwork and, having each other's backs and, working together and depending on each other, you're taught that starting in...
Sure.
And it's reinforced over the years by superior officers and your colleagues, correct?
Sure.
Now, you were assigned as the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis for this case, correct?
Assigned as the what?
You were assigned as the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis for this case.
I don't know reconstruction analysis. No, I was the patrol supervisor that day.
If I may just have a moment, Ron.
Okay.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to show the whole thing, directing to page 5. With that line.
He's directing him to page 5.
Now, I'm going to show you what is, not sure how many pages, but there are quite a few.
Okay.
It's a
Your Honor, if you could not describe what he's showing to the witness and
Yeah,
just
just
show
go
it to
ahead
him.
and show it to him.
Sure. I'm going to direct you, I'm taking up the first 4 pages and directing you just to the 5th page.
Okay.
And specifically the second paragraph, and it's numbered number 2.
Okay.
And I will ask you if you've seen that before.
Okay.
And I'll take it back from you.
Okay.
Do you, may-
Sure.
Thank you. Do you recognize what this is?
Looks like some state police form.
Okay. Is it a
Why don't you not ask him? He just answered what he thought it was.
are you familiar with a collision analysis and reconstruction section, a CARS report?
I know the state police has a cars section that handles motor vehicle homicide.
Does this appear to be a CARS report?
I've never seen one. There's you just showed me one. I'm not in the state police.
But you did see that your name is listed in the paragraph that I pointed out to you,
Sure.
and you're listed as Sgt Goode, that's you, correct?
Mhm.
Of the Canton Police. And you were assigned as the primary investigator in this reconstruction.
Because I wrote the offense report from that day.
Well, I'm just asking you. I'm dealing with a state police report that lists you as the primary investigator with regard to the reconstruction.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Sustained. Sure, why don't you all come up for a minute? Bring that, please.
That's how he's listed. Okay, where am I going?
Sergeant Goode, what was your understanding on February 1st of 2022 regarding the Canton Police Department's role in this homicide investigation?
I believe at some point on the 29th, we recused ourselves and we weren't part of the investigation.
Okay, so you did know as of the day that John O'Keefe was found on Brian Albert's front lawn that the Canton Police had recused itself from the case, correct?
At some point, I was notified after I finished all my paperwork, yeah.
And what was your understanding of the recusal decision in terms of what Canton Police was either allowed to do or not?
Well, he had passed away, so now no matter what, it's state police investigation. It's a homicide. We do not investigate homicides.
Well, you've been a Canton police officer for 18 years, correct?
Yes.
During those 18 years, do you know how many homicide investigations have occurred in Canton?
None.
None?
Homicides? No. That I was involved in? None.
That the department was involved in?
I can't think off the top of my head, no.
So in the 18 years, this is the first homicide that your department's been involved in, to your knowledge?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that although the state police have primary jurisdiction, they work hand in hand with local departments, usually, unless there's a conflict of interest?
Yes.
So in this case, you learned that there was a conflict of interest. And my question to you is, what did that mean in terms of your potential involvement in the investigation once that conflict was determined?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
How else?
Were you the primary investigator for the Canton Police Department as of February 1st?
No.
So why were you listed?
Did you participate with the state police in any part of the reconstruction?
No.
Now, Sergeant Goode, who is Brian Higgins?
He is a ATF agent that has a satellite office out of the Canton Police Department.
And when did you come to meet him?
I have no idea when he started. It's been years.
Years, over a decade?
I don't think so, but maybe.
Between 5 and 10 years?
Sure.
And how often would you see him at the Canton Police Station?
I worked midnights, so during that time, but I mean, 3 times a week I would see him. I mean, we don't have the same work schedule. I don't know when he works. He doesn't know when I do.
Okay. And when you say you work midnight, that means you come in at midnight?
Yes.
At 8 a.m.?
Correct.
And he works in the same building as you in terms of the fact that he has an office there, correct?
Yes.
Are there any other ATF agents that have offices at the Canton?
There could be. They don't check in with us.
Do you know of any ATF agents that have offices at the Canton Police Department?
Not that I know of, no.
What about officers from other local departments, surrounding towns? Do they have any offices at the Canton Police Department?
No.
And you're not sure exactly how long he's had that office for, but it's been years.
Correct.
He has his own key card to enter the building?
Yes.
And you say you've seen him 2 or 3 times a week in the time that he's had an office there?
Sure.
You're aware that Brian Higgins is a close friend of the former Canton Police Chief, Kenneth Berkowitz?
Sure.
You know that Chief Berkowitz was the reason that he was allowed to maintain an office at the Canton Police Department?
I didn't know that.
Well, his close friend, Chief Berkowitz, was your boss on January 29th of 2022, correct?
His close friend?
Yeah, Brian Higgins' close friend, Chief Berkowitz, was your boss on January 29th of 2022.
Okay.
And does okay mean yes?
Yes.
And you worked the midnight shift that day as well?
No,
What was your shift?
I took it off.
He's trying to connect dots.
Were you assigned to dispatch that day?
The night of the incident?
Yes.
No, I stayed inside. I was inside.
Inside where?
The dispatch. I handle all the calls, send the guys everywhere.
Right, that was my question. I'm sorry if I'm
Okay.
I'm not being clear, but you were on duty, correct?
Yes.
What was your shift?
My shift was I stayed inside.
I'm sorry. What was the timing of your shift?
12 to 8.
Thank you. And when you say you stayed inside, that meant you were handling dispatch, correct?
Correct.
And when you're handling dispatch, you're not expected to leave the station and physically respond to calls that come in, correct?
It depends on the call. Anything within reason that a supervisor should go, I'm leaving the station.
Okay, but
Normal car accidents, stuff like that patrol can handle, no.
okay, so unless it's something unusual, you're going to stay at dispatch, correct?
Correct.
And just after 1:30 a.m., while you were working dispatch, that's when you saw Brian Higgins enter the Canton Police Station at 1:30 in the morning, correct?
Correct.
Did he come into the dispatch area?
I said that earlier. I don't remember him coming in, or just did I see him on the cameras walking down the hallway? We have I think we have 7 or 8 monitors in front of me that I'm able to watch people around our building.
So it could be that you just saw him on a screen, or it could be that he was in your room.
Correct.
But you don't remember which, correct?
Correct.
And before he showed up there at 1:30, you hadn't called him to ask him to come in, correct?
No.
You hadn't asked him for any help with any investigation at 1:30, correct?
No.
When you first saw him there at 1:30, did you have any idea why he was showing up?
No.
And when you first saw him, do you remember what entrance he used to come into the Canton Police Station?
I don't. It was from the back parking lot. I don't know if he was on the left back rear or right back rear.
And you would agree with me that 1:30 in the morning was hours before John O'Keefe was found unresponsive on Brian Albert's front lawn, correct?
Yes.
You had no information at 1:30 in the morning that John O'Keefe was out on Brian Albert's front lawn at that.
Dun, dun, dun. Now I know why he's asking. Because if you follow defense's theory, there was an altercation after he was dropped off by Karen. There was an altercation with Mr. O'Keefe inside the Albert house. And at 1:30 would match up with some other theory that they have. So Brian Higgins must be involved in the cover-up to some degree. That's what I think they're leading to. And there's somebody who around was either 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning did a Google search on how long does it take for somebody to freeze, to die in the cold. So that's the dots they're trying to connect, if I'm understanding things correctly.
That time, correct?
Correct.
And when Brian Higgins entered the department, that was the first time you had seen him on either the 28th or the 29th, correct?
Correct.
And this is again at 1:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you have to say yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you. You didn't know where he was coming from?
No.
You didn't know what he had done that night?
Absolutely not.
You didn't know who he had been with that night?
No.
This was a Friday night into early Saturday morning with a major blizzard forecast.
Correct.
It already started snowing.
Yes.
It was supposed to get worse.
Yes.
Was it unusual to see Brian Higgins come into the station at 1:30 a.m. on a weekend?
No.
And you don't recall how close you got to him.
No.
Are you able to tell this jury anything about his demeanor?
No. He just walked in. It's not unusual. We wouldn't have made pleasantries or say hello to each other. It's not uncommon.
And you don't recall whether or not you got close enough to him to smell his breath or to smell what he smelled like, correct?
No.
He might have been part of the group that was drinking that night.
At any point,
At
did
the
he
bar.
tell you why he was there?
No.
How long did he remain at the station for?
No idea. I only saw him come in. Never saw him leave or anything like that.
Did you ever see him do any paperwork at the station?
That night?
Yes.
No.
Did you ever see him do any administrative work at the station?
I can't leave the dispatch room. His office is out on the second floor.
So let's skip ahead a few hours later. You're still working dispatch when a call came in that a man was found unresponsive on Brian Albert's front lawn, correct?
Yes.
It's just after 6 a.m.
Yes.
You yourself took that call?
I did.
And with regard to who is responsible for entering the information that came in on a call to dispatch, who is that?
The person that's working the desk.
So at 6 a.m., you were responsible for taking down the information and entering it into your system, correct?
It's being recorded through the 911 dispatch, correct? But I didn't enter it into our IMC program, which is our daily log.
Okay, who enters that into your daily log?
That'd be the person that's working the desk.
Wouldn't that be you?
And you had previously testified that location is important, correct?
Correct.
You would discuss the fact that if a call comes in on a cell phone as opposed to a landline, you want to know where that cell phone is, correct?
Yes.
And you have ways of pinging the cell phone such that you can actually see the location on a map, correct?
Sure. Yes.
And you would agree with me that ultimately when the location was entered into your system, the location was entered as 32 Fairview, correct?
No, it was 34. At least we put it out as 34.
34 was the actual address, but 32 is what made it into the police report, sir, did it not?
No, my police report says 34 Fairview.
Then somebody tampered with something, because everybody else is saying it's 32.
I know that. Initial page that says 32. Now, when that call came in after 6 a.m., you decided that you would personally go out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I actually have the front page of your police report. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Show Mr. Lally.
Thank you.
I'd ask you to read that silently to yourself, take a good look at it, and look up at me when you're done. You've had enough time to review it?
Yes.
Getting back to the location, which you said was important, what is the location listed in your very police report?
On the face sheet, it says 32, but in my narrative is 34.
Okay. The face sheet is important, is it not?
Yes.
People see the face sheet before they get to the narrative, correct?
Sure.
Is accuracy important?
Yes.
And the very first thing that's entered with regard to the location is inaccurate, right?
Say it again.
The very first entry with regard to the location on your police report on the face sheet is inaccurate. Would you agree with that?
I guess so, yes.
And with regard to the name down the bottom of that report, I left the report in front of you so you could look at it again. Would you read that silently to yourself and look up at me?
Okay.
Does that refresh your memory as to what name is listed?
Yes.
What name is that?
John O'Keefe.
I can have that back for a minute. Okay. Now, you decided that you wanted to go to the call, or you decided it would be a good thing for you to go to the call personally, correct?
Yes,
So you called Officer Kelly Deaver into dispatch,
I did.
and you did that because you wanted her to cover the desk for you so that you could personally respond to the call, correct?
Correct.
Responding to the call wasn't your duty assignment, but you made it your duty assignment, correct?
Correct.
And if you were going to leave, somebody had to cover.
Correct.
After that, you personally called two of your other colleagues who were not on duty that night to respond with you to Brian Albert's house, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you previously testified, I believe, that Sergeant Michael Lank was one of those officers, and he arrived at 6:25 a.m., correct?
Correct.
And then Lieutenant Paul Gallagher was the other officer, and he arrived closer to 7 a.m., correct?
Yes.
When you responded to 34 Fairview on January 29th, did you know that residence?
Yes.
And what did you know that residence to be?
I knew that to be Brian Albert's house.
You and Sergeant Lank had both been to that residence before, correct?
No.
Together.
Actually, we have. We were there for a police report years ago.
And so when you decided to respond to the scene on January 29th, that residence of 34 Fairview, you knew exactly where you were going.
Yes.
And when you got there, you knew you were outside the home of Boston Officer Brian Albert, correct?
Yes.
And this was a memorable event. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Before January 29th of 2022, you had never responded to a call where the body of one police officer was found on the front lawn of another police officer's house, correct?
Yes.
And at some point after you arrived, you saw both Sergeant Lank and Detective Gallagher arrive, correct?
Yes.
It was Sergeant Lank who first entered the home and made initial contact with Brian Albert and his family?
No, I was right next to him.
So is it your testimony that the first time the police went in the house, you were there with Sergeant Lank?
Yes.
All right. And when you went in, can I have Exhibit 8 on the screen, please? Okay. Terrific. You're able to see Exhibit 8?
Yes.
Is that a fair depiction of what the house looked like when you entered it?
Yes.
What
Did
door?
you see the front door?
Yes.
Is that the door that you entered?
Yes.
And you had testified that you looked around the immediate area where you were while Sergeant Lank was asking questions. You noticed that when you entered that front door, you come into a foyer area, and directly in front of you on the left, you can almost reach out and touch. There's a door that goes down to the cellar. Is there not?
I don't know. I don't remember a door there. I remember the stairs going up to the second floor.
I see. So you don't remember that as you step into the house, you can go down a cellar door right away?
Objection.
No, I don't know where his cellar is.
The objection sustained.
You don't know where the cellar is, and that's in part because you did not go down to the cellar, correct?
Correct.
You never examined it?
No.
You never saw what condition it was in?
No.
Saw whether there was any signs of struggle down there?
No.
Never saw if anything was tipped over?
That's
No.
where they
Never
hang
saw
out
whether
and
there
have
was
their
any
parties.
blood or other trace evidence down there?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection sustained. You've made your point. Can we turn the lights back on,
That
please?
was
Do you need this, Ms. Giannetti?
I do not.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, now going back to when you first arrived, Sergeant, you were alone in your cruiser, correct?
Yes.
You weren't driving with a partner that morning.
No.
You were the second officer on scene?
No. Third.
Who got there before you did?
Officer Saraf and Officer Mulaney.
Okay, so Mulaney actually beat you there?
Yes.
But only within a matter of minutes, correct?
Sure.
You arrived in your marked cruiser, correct?
Yes.
You had your overhead emergency lights on, correct?
Correct.
You pulled up right in the front of the house, facing in the wrong direction in terms of the lane that you were in?
Correct.
You were parked on Fairview, adjacent to the Albert residence, and you were facing towards Cedar Crest, correct?
Correct.
When you parked, you left your motor running, correct?
Yes.
And when you got out of your cruiser, one prominent sound that you heard was Karen Reed screaming at the top of her lungs, correct?
Yes.
She appeared to be in distress.
Correct.
She appeared to be crying.
I did not see her crying.
She was hysterical.
Yes.
She was very loud.
Yes.
And you could hear her yelling throughout that morning, could you not?
Correct.
After you got there, other emergency vehicles showed up?
No.
Did you see any other cruisers show up?
If you want to call it an unmarked detective pickup truck, a cruiser, sure.
Okay, so there was one additional police vehicle that showed up?
Sergeant Lank arrived in that, and then Lieutenant Paul Gallagher arrived in his unmarked cruiser.
Okay, so two additional vehicles. And also Officer Saraf's vehicle was there?
And Mulaney's, correct.
And Mulaney's. So we're now up to 4 police vehicles on scene?
Yes.
They all have their lights on?
No. Detective Sergeant Lanks does not have any lights in it, and neither did Paul Gallagher's lights were not activated, I believe.
I see. So you and Saraf and Mulaney had your lights on?
Correct.
And I actually miscounted. That would be 5 police vehicles, correct?
Sure.
All right. 3 with their lights on. What about ambulances?
There were 2 ambulances that showed up, one for the first transport of Officer O'Keefe and second for Miss Reed, but they were never there at the same time.
All right. When you first got there, was the first ambulance there?
It was.
And that ambulance also had its lights on?
Yes.
How many fire trucks were there when you were there?
Just one.
And that also had its lights on as well?
Correct.
And engine running?
Yes.
And everyone was essentially parked around and in front of 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
And all the while, the first responders are talking over the noise of the storm, correct?
Yes.
And they're also talking over the screaming by Karen Reed, correct?
Sure.
At one point, Kerry Roberts even yelled at Karen, and I apologize for the language, but she yelled at her to shut the fuck up, correct?
I have no idea. I don't recall that.
The scene was very chaotic. Would you agree?
Yes.
All right. Could I have Exhibit 16 on the screen, please? Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, this has previously been admitted as sort of a side-to-side comparison between your cruiser dash cam and Officer Saraf's dash cam.
Okay.
And they've been synchronized.
Okay.
If we could start at 9 minutes in, please.
So, Ms. Giannetti, this is not yet in evidence.
I had it as Exhibit 16. Am I
Right.
correct?
Right. So it's not in yet.
I see. With regard to your dash cam, sir, do you recognize the bottom video here as depicting your view as you were driving to the scene?
Sure.
And that appears to be a fair and accurate representation of what was shown to you on direct examination with regard to your dash cam?
Yes.
You can continue.
But it's still not in evidence. You have to ask it to be in evidence because he identified it. Yes? Isn't that the procedure? Whose station wagon is that up there anyway?
Okay, we can pause it there. Would you agree with me, Sergeant Goode, that you're arriving on scene at approximately 6:16 a.m. on January 29th?
Yes.
And I'd ask you to review and compare your dash cam video with the top dash cam video for the next 30 seconds or a minute, please. And
That's not what I want.
questions after that.
Sure.
Is that where they're trying to talk her into going into the ambulance and go to the, because of the section 12?
Sergeant Goode, does it appear as though the top dash cam shows the exact same thing as the bottom dash cam, just from a different vantage point?
Yes.
Play it for another 20, 30 seconds. Pause it there. Were you able to see when people are moving, or when somebody's moving in the top version, they're also moving in the bottom version, just again from different vantage points?
Yes.
So do these both appear to be fair and accurate representations of the dash cams that were going on at that time?
Yes.
Oh, somebody was going in the house right
Okay,
here.
I'd like to see Councilor Sidebar for just 1 second on this.
If I'm not mistaken, there's a shadow here, which indicates somebody leaving the group and going inside at an earlier time than what everybody is saying. If I'm not mistaken. And I could be. Very much so, I could be. I wonder how long Sidebar is. Sidebar. I can't even do a Bostonian accent. I'm just going to let it run. But I think that might be what he's leading into. Because somebody showed that before, I think.
So this will now become Exhibit 16. We had it as a placeholder from before. It was 379, and on Friday, we said that it would stay as 16, assuming it was put in evidence. That's what you have, Tori and Jim? Great.
Musical exhibit numbers.
Okay, we can take that off the screen. Thank you. Now, Sergeant Goode, you've testified that you got there at about 6:16 a.m. and relying on Exhibit 16 that I placed before you, correct?
Okay. Yes.
You stayed on scene for over an hour and 40 minutes. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
You left maybe around 7:50 a.m. or so?
Correct.
And during the beginning part of the 1 hour and 40 minutes that you were on scene, with all the vehicles that we've just seen at around 6:16 a.m. and for the first 10, 15 minutes with all those lights flashing, you never saw Brian Albert come out of his house, correct?
Correct.
And did you see first responders working on John O'Keefe when you were there?
No.
He had already been loaded into the ambulance at that time?
Correct.
So you didn't see him actually being scooped up and put on a stretcher, correct?
I don't recall. No.
And with regard to the remainder of the time that you were on scene, up until all the way through 7:50 in the morning, did you ever see Brian Albert come out of his home?
No.
Did you ever see anyone come out of the Albert residence?
Other than Jen McCabe and Matt McCabe, no.
Were you aware when you entered the Albert residence that morning that John O'Keefe was found on his front lawn wearing only one shoe, black in color?
I was not aware of him missing a shoe, no.
While you were there, you were listening to the questions that Sergeant Lank was asking Brian Albert?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Sergeant Lank ask Brian Albert that morning if he knew where the other shoe was that was black in color?
Objection.
Sustained.
What's wrong with that?
While you were there, ever hear Sergeant Lank ask Brian Albert when he learned that John O'Keefe was lying on his front lawn?
Objection.
Sustained.
Was that considered hearsay?
You knew that Brian Albert, as a Boston police officer, is a first responder, correct?
Yes.
All police officers are first responders, correct?
Yes.
You know from your training that all police officers have to receive CPR and other necessary training to be first responders, correct?
Yes.
At any point in time, did you ask Brian Albert why he didn't come out of his house?
No.
Did Sergeant Lank, in your presence, ask him why he didn't come out of his house?
Objection.
Sustained.
Stop it.
After
Stop
clearing the
it.
scene at 7:50 in the morning,
Quit trying to slip
did you
things
go back
in.
to the station?
I did.
Do you know whether or not Kevin Albert was working that day?
I don't.
Did you see Kevin Albert that day?
I don't recall seeing him.
Did you speak with Kevin Albert that day?
No.
Now, since that day, it's been almost 2.5 years. You've continued working on the same police force as Kevin Albert, correct?
Yes.
At some point in time, you and Kevin Albert discussed the fact that you were one of the first responding officers to his brother's home for this tragic incident, correct?
Yes.
It's a very unique situation, correct?
Yes.
Many officers in the department were interested to know what you saw and heard that day, correct?
Sure.
At what point in time after January 29th did Kevin Albert broach the topic with you as to what had happened on January 29th?
Objection.
Can you answer that?
Sure. I don't recall ever immediately talking to Kevin Albert about the incident. No.
Right. Well, you had said that you don't recall talking to him that day, but certainly within a couple of weeks, the two of you caught up, correct?
I can't remember. No.
I'm sorry?
I can't recall that. No.
Within a couple of months, you talked about it?
Sure.
And when you say sure, sir, I take that as you're saying, well, if you really want to go there, I'll give you the sure answer. You have to answer yes or no.
Okay. Yes.
So you answer yes or no if you
Yeah.
can, and if you can't, you can't. So
Right.
ask the question again or just move on, please.
Do you recall where you were when you and Kevin Albert discussed what had happened on January 29th?
No.
Do you recall who else was present?
No.
Do you recall whether it was in person or over the phone?
I don't recall. No.
You certainly told him what you observed and heard that day, correct?
Yes.
Now, when you arrived, you were on scene not only to assist with first aid and secure the scene, but as a first responder, your job is to assess the situation and also make an initial determination about gathering evidence. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
You'd be on the lookout for any physical evidence, correct?
Yes.
And you'd certainly be on high alert for any individual who made any statement about what may have occurred, correct?
Correct.
That's important not only for treatment purposes of somebody who apparently is hurt, but also for investigative purposes, correct?
Correct.
And again, you were the third officer on the scene by minutes in terms of the other two officers arriving before you, correct?
Yes.
And while you were on scene for over an hour and 40 minutes, and by the way, when I say on scene, it's clear to you that I'm asking you about 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes.
There was no scene at the Canton Police Department, correct?
No, I'm talking about 34 Fairview.
Of course. A scene is where something happened, correct?
Yes.
Okay, where are you going with this?
While you were on scene at 34 Fairview for an hour and 40 minutes, did you ever once hear Karen Reed say, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I did not.
And you wrote a report regarding this, correct?
I did.
You are trained over your 18 years that you include every important detail in that report, correct?
Correct.
Certainly a statement by Karen Reed screaming out, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, would have been an important detail that you would have included in your report, correct?
Yes.
But this was
Do
later,
not
too.
intentionally omit, I should say, any important details from your report, correct?
Correct.
Did not include that language, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, in your report, correct?
Correct.
And the reason you didn't include it is that you never heard those words come out of Karen Reed's mouth, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now getting back to, potential physical evidence, if you're at a potential crime scene, you want to find what you can, correct?
Correct.
You want to properly secure any physical evidence, right?
Correct.
In order to assist the investigation, you're prepared to conduct a thorough search for evidence that may shed light on what had happened, correct?
Correct.
And you did participate in a thorough search in this case, did you not?
The best we could in the elements that we were dealing with. Yes.
You had previously, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Nope.
If I did. You had previously testified, and I think I'm quoting you, the leaf blower worked great, correct?
Yes.
You would agree with me that with that leaf blower, your department was able to actually get down to the bare ground, correct?
Yes.
And you were directed to the precise area where John O'Keefe had been laying, correct?
Yes.
And so you knew the area that needed to be searched, correct?
Yes.
You certainly want to properly search around that area, correct?
Correct.
And after John O'Keefe was in the ambulance and then transported to the hospital, that was the very area that you were eyeballing, correct?
Yes.
And you visually searched that area as best you could in the conditions, correct?
Yes.
And you tried to be as careful as you could be.
Yes.
You did not want to miss anything.
Correct.
You took the job very seriously.
Yes.
In addition to scouring the area with your eyes, did you use your hands to search in the snow?
I don't remember doing that. I was recording it.
I'm sorry.
I don't remember it that way. I was recording the scene.
I see. Okay. Did you see other officers using their hands to search the scene?
I don't recall it that.
Do you recall officers using their feet to clear some areas?
Yes.
And you were the one that actually got your leaf blower, correct?
I did.
First time you ever used that in an investigation, fair to say?
Yes.
And your search was thorough enough, and when I say your search, I mean your department search in addition to your observations. It was thorough enough that you actually did recover small droplets of blood, correct?
We did.
Who was it that collected those blood droplets?
That was Lieutenant Gallagher and Sergeant Lank.
Lank.
In addition to the blood droplets, you were looking for anything else that might be out of place there?
Sure.
Small items,
Of course.
large items?
Anything.
And as you were on scene, it was starting to get lighter as the morning progressed, correct?
Yes.
And again, you didn't clear the scene until almost 8 a.m.
Correct.
And you searched and were keeping alert to what was around you for the time that you were on scene, correct?
Yes.
During that 1 hour, I should say, and 40 minutes, you did not find 45 pieces of red and black and clear taillight pieces at 34th Fairview, correct?
No.
how many pieces of taillight did you find on or around that property?
That morning, none.
Did you find a men's hat, black in color?
No.
Did you find a size 12 men's shoe, black in color?
No.
Now, you would agree that it's important to preserve and secure a crime scene?
Yes.
Why is that?
You don't want the crime scene to be contaminated.
And you also do not want, and you'd like to prevent a crime scene from also being manipulated. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And what steps were taken, either by you or in your presence, to close off and secure the crime scene at 34 Fairview?
We had crime scene tape up while we were there, and then we also had Officer Mulaney on the road.
And when you say you had Officer Mulaney on the road, you mean blocking off the road?
Correct.
Are you aware of something called a crime scene log?
No.
You recall being trained in the academy that when there is a crime scene that needs to be preserved, it is advisable to set up a log so that all personnel are required to sign in and sign out. Again, to prevent contamination and to prevent manipulation. Do you not recall that training?
I don't recall that, no.
With regard to the fact that it was actively snowing at the time, did you consider putting a tent around the area to prevent and minimize the environmental intrusions like the snow?
It would have been useless.
Did you utilize any heaters to assist in melting the snow in that area?
No.
And before you cleared the scene, or I should say when you cleared the scene, did you post an officer to guard the scene so that nobody could get in or out?
No.
How long was the road closed off for?
While we were there, so those 2 hours.
All right. And then after the 2 hours, there was nobody guarding the scene. Would you agree?
Yes, correct.
The road was not closed off.
No.
That crime scene was open to the public.
Correct.
I was hearing voices.
So with regard to, you know, a crime scene log, a tent, heaters, keeping an officer there to make sure nobody got in or out of that crime scene, you would agree none of those protocols were followed, correct?
I don't believe there is a protocol for a tent in our policy.
Okay. So I guess leave the tent out of it. None
Okay.
of those other protocols were followed, correct?
Correct.
And certainly a tent was not put up either.
No.
Correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to your police report, going back to that, your report clearly listed persons involved in the case, correct?
Correct.
And that police report is generated by computer software, correct? That's
Yeah.
particular to police reports?
Correct.
And that's one of the categories that you can fill in, correct?
Correct.
Got about another half hour.
Would you agree with me that with regard to all of the persons involved listed in your police report, everybody's first name and last name was completely spelled out except for one? Would you agree with that?
I don't. I believe those names were entered by Detective Sergeant Lank.
Okay, but certainly the report has your name on it, correct?
Correct.
So you would review the report before
Sure.
submitting it in your name, correct?
Correct.
So regardless of who entered or didn't enter, my question remains, which is that with regard to the persons involved listed in that report, everybody's name, first and last, is spelled out except for one, correct?
Correct.
Whose name was not spelled out completely?
I don't know.
May I approach?
Okay.
Page 2, Counsel.
This complexion
Thank you.
is kind of red.
Silently, and then look up at me when you're done. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Having reviewed that report, does that refresh your memory as to whose name was not completely spelled out?
Correct.
Who was that?
Brian Albert.
And why is that? The
Did you omit Brian Albert's first name to mask the fact that he was involved?
No. No.
Do you know who Colin Albert is?
I know that he is Chris Albert's son.
And so therefore he'd be Brian Albert's nephew?
Yes.
Anywhere in your report, do you mention that Colin Albert was present at 34 Fairview the night of January 28th going into January 29th?
No.
Now, would you agree with me that this report also lists home addresses for everyone in the persons involved section, except for one person?
Can I see the sheet again, please? Thank you.
This is the same, if I may approach.
Yes.
This is the same sheet that I sent you last time.
Thank you.
Take your time with it, sir. Thank you. And Sergeant, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What am I talking about?
Brian Higgins.
Okay. So with regard to Brian Higgins, his home address was not listed on there, correct?
Correct.
And what address was listed for Brian Higgins?
1492 Washington Street.
And what is significant about that address?
It's the town of Canton.
It's the Town of Canton Police Department, correct?
Correct.
Now, Brian Higgins was not an involved person because he was an investigator on the case, correct?
Correct.
He was not involved in this case in an official capacity, correct?
Correct.
You were, right?
Yes.
So listing the Canton Police Department as Sgt Goode's address would be appropriate. Would you agree?
Yes.
Why was Brian Higgins' address listed at as the Canton Police Department?
I don't know.
But that is something that you kept in your report, correct?
Correct.
Did somebody else fill out the report and he just signed it?
Okay. Now, I also want to ask you something else about your police report. And I want to focus on whether it was altered after it was first submitted, okay? If I can...
Hold on. Do you have your report with you?
I do not.
Okay. Do you have a copy for him, Ms. Gianetti?
I guess that's the stop.
Yes, sure. Go ahead. No, that's okay.
I've placed a document before you. Feel free to familiarize yourself with it. And please look up at me when you're done.
There's a lot to it.
Good.
Does that appear to be your police report, sir?
Yes.
Now, and with the court's permission, I'd actually like the officer to have the report in front of him when I ask him these questions.
Okay, but nothing's going up on the screen, right?
Not yet.
Okay, so approach before it does.
I will, I promise.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm directing your attention to the first page.
Okay.
You will agree with me that this report is submitted with regard to incident number 22-87-OF.
Correct.
And this is call number 22-449, correct?
Correct.
The date and time reported is listed as January 29th of 2022 at 06:08, correct?
Correct.
Which would be in military time, 6:08 a.m.
Correct.
The report date and time is listed as January 29th of 2022.
Objection, Your Honor.
All right, so why don't we come to sidebar now? And
Yeah, no. He's letting him know what is accurate and what isn't. Foundation.
Is he here?
Okay, what happened? Why is the jury going? Oh, the guy that's coming up, they had to do, this is what I'm thinking of. What do they call it? Where you have to pre-qualify somebody? Voidere? This should still be sidebar. Why aren't we in sidebar? I'm going to let it run because obviously
this at sidebar now. Okay, so the same 3 cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. So we'll see you tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning's a half day.
Sirs, if you would fold and close your notebooks, leaving them on the chairs, taking all your belongings, follow me, all rise.
Goodbye.
I don't know where that comes from. That could be court TV. We're going to watch this, even though the jury would not have seen this. Oh, look who's coming.
Please watch your step to the stand, face the clerk, and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court in the case now and hearing true the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Mayor, Your Honor?
please.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us late in the afternoon, Sergeant Lank. I'm going to direct your attention to your relationship with the Albert family and some of the members of the Albert family. Do you know who Tim Albert is?
Yes.
Do you know who Chris Albert is?
Yes.
Do you know who
Could I
Brian
just
Albert?
interrupt? I just need your name for the.
I'm so sorry. Can you please state your name and spell your name for the record, please?
Michael Lank, L-A-N-K.
Michael, common spelling?
Yes,
Thank you. I'll start over. Do you know who Tim Albert is?
I do.
And do you know who Chris Albert is?
I do.
And do you know who Brian Albert is?
I do.
How do you know Tim Albert?
I know Tim Albert to be one of the younger brothers of the Albert family
How long have you known Tim?
since childhood.
What about Chris Albert?
Yes, I know Chris
How long have you known Chris?
since childhood.
And how would you describe your relationship with Chris Albert?
Chris and I were pretty good friends growing up, right into our 20s. Still friendly when I see him.
Still socialize with him?
No.
When did you last socialize with Chris Albert?
I couldn't tell you the last time I personally socialized with him. I've seen him at events, but Chris and I don't make arrangements to go out together.
What about Brian Albert?
No.
How would you describe your relationship with him?
Civil.
Friendly?
Exchange pleasantries when I see him. Hello.
But you're closer to Chris.
Yes.
Have you ever described yourself as being a longtime, quote unquote, drinking buddy with Chris?
No,
Would you describe yourself previously, in years past, as being a drinking buddy of Chris?
no,
Have you ever gone out for drinks with Chris?
not in years.
Ever?
Yes,
So you've socialized with him in circumstances in which y'all are drinking and imbibing.
it's been many years, but yes.
Your relationship with Chris certainly goes all the way back to 2002.
Again, we were friendlier back then, yes.
Right. Back in 2002 in August, while you were off duty, were you out either drinking with Chris or in some way at a restaurant or a bar with Chris?
No,
Were you close in proximity to Chris when he was out drinking and at a bar?
no.
Was he at a restaurant?
I don't know where he was.
Were you at a bar?
I was.
At some point, did you realize that Chris was getting into some sort of a physical altercation with somebody else in a parking lot?
Yes,
Did you jump into a fist fight in order to protect Chris Albert?
Chris actually approached my vehicle and started to describe an altercation that had been in previously in the night.
When you say your vehicle, your personal vehicle?
Yes,
Okay, so you were off duty, is that right?
yes,
You've been drinking.
yes,
Nothing wrong with that, but just
Yes.
so happens that you've been drinking that afternoon.
yes.
Tim Albert was with Chris, correct?
Not when I saw him, no.
Okay. Ultimately, when you realized that Chris Albert was in some sort of fracas, some sort of fight or altercation, you activated yourself as a police officer at the time.
He wasn't in a fracas when he approached my vehicle. He approached my vehicle and stated that he had been in an altercation earlier in the night with one of the Lapalato brothers, and that during that altercation, threats were made against him and his family, and he was seeking advice because he knew I was a police officer as to how he should go forward. And as I was telling him what to do, that's when a group of men started to walk down Washington Street towards Chris, and he said, "Oh no, here they come."
So that would be Mark Lapalato, correct?
Yes,
And his brother Alfred.
yes, Alfredo.
Alfredo, sorry. You got out of your car and approached the other men.
Yes.
You also called for a Canton police backup.
I brought my attention to the restaurant owner and a bartender who had walked out into the street, and I yelled for them to call the Canton police.
Canton police did in fact arrive, correct?
They did.
Isn't it true that after you got involved and Canton police arrived, you then instructed some of your colleague police officers to handcuff Alfredo?
I can't recall.
Isn't it true that after Alfredo was handcuffed and, for all intents and purposes, physically incapacitated, you then approached Mark Lapalato?
No.
You got into a fight with Mark Lapalato, though?
Yes.
You punched him in the face?
At one point after he had struck me, yes.
So your story is he struck you first, and then you punched him.
Yes.
His story, of course, is you punched him first.
I don't know what his story is.
Well, you were sued in federal court, and he told you his story in that lawsuit, correct?
So I actually have a question. The criminal case was adjudicated. The civil case, I did sign a non-disclosure, so I'm not sure if I can speak on that.
I will never ask you what the nature of any settlement within that case was. Just the fact that you were sued in a public document, which a federal lawsuit is a public document. You were sued in federal court over this incident that I'm talking about, correct?
Yes,
And ultimately it was settled. I'll never ask you what the terms of the settlement are. 'Cause that's
it was settled, yes.
Okay. Ultimately, you said that the criminal case was adjudicated. We'll get to that in just a second. Did you testify at that criminal case?
I did.
All right. I want to sort of tailor this a little bit because we're on a little bit of a time crunch, and I want to be sensitive to the court's time and your time. The allegation that Mark Lapalato made against you is that you punched him, took him to the ground, continued to beat him, and bit him to the point of drawing blood, correct?
I believe that was his allegation, yes.
Then indicated that once the police officers that were there pulled you off of him, You then turned and walked over to Alfredo while he was still incapacitated, meaning physically handcuffed, and spat in his face.
I believe that was his allegation, yes.
Ultimately, both men, after this altercation, were allowed to leave the location, correct?
I believe one fled and the other one was allowed to leave, yes.
Okay. You're telling me now that Mark Lopolito punched you first, a police officer, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware of any circumstance in which an individual would be able to punch a police officer on duty or off duty in the presence of other police officers and just be released? That wouldn't happen, would it?
I don't believe the other police officers were on scene when the fight initiated.
Did you tell them that you got punched?
I don't recall.
They certainly let Mark go, correct?
Mark fled.
Okay. And then
Alfredo was released.
so the next day, Mark and Alfredo showed up at Canton PD to file a complaint against you and some of the other police officers that were involved, correct?
That's what I was told. I wasn't there.
You didn't file a report for assault, or battery, or anything like that, correct?
I spoke with my sergeant that night, and he said that I could do the report when I came back in on my next day of work.
My question is, on that night, did you file a report?
No,
The next day, did you file a report?
I don't recall if it was 1 or 2 days later.
It's actually 3 days later, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Does it sound like that's in the time frame? It probably was about 3 days later.
I honestly couldn't tell you. It's 22 years ago. I'm not really sure.
But between the time this fight happened and you filed a report, Mark Lopolito and his brother Alfredo came into Canton PD and asked to swear out a complaint against you and fellow officers, correct?
I believe so.
And they were told to go away on that day.
I couldn't speak to that.
By the time they came back to file the complaint, then police reports had been written, right?
I don't know.
Once those police reports were written, after they indicated that they wanted to file a complaint, ultimately charges were brought against them, correct?
Again, ultimately charges were brought. I don't know the exact timeline.
After charges had been brought, and both brothers ended up having to go to court and defend themselves, you ran into both brothers at a mobile gas station.
Yes.
You confronted both brothers, correct?
No.
You approached both brothers.
No.
Isn't it true that you walked up and said, "How you doing?" to the two guys? And one of them responded, "Not so good. You attacked me and now I've got to go to court."
No,
That conversation?
I believe they initiated the conversation with me.
Did you say, "How are you doing?"
Something to that nature.
And did they respond something to the effect of, "I'm not doing so good because you attacked me and now I've got to defend myself in court"?
I don't recall exactly what they said in response.
And then, based on that interaction, you arrested them for witness intimidation, correct?
Well, there was further interaction. It wasn't just the response to "how are you doing?" They made threats and they were ultimately arrested, yes.
So your claim now is that they made threats against you, a sitting police officer at the time, a working police officer?
Yes.
Okay. And you reported that threat to the DA's office?
Yes.
And charges were brought against them? I'm sorry. A report was brought against them for that witness intimidation, correct?
Correct.
Ultimately, with regard to the assault charges for which they were arrested and tried, they were found not guilty in a public adjudication, criminal case, correct?
Correct.
And the DA's office threw out the witness intimidation charges because they were meritless. Isn't that right?
The charges were thrown out.
Meritless.
And all of this history that we've just talked about came on the heels of you assisting Chris and Tim Albert in a fight they said they had been in earlier in the evening. Is that right?
No.
You just told us that the reason you got involved in this melee, this fight to begin with, was because Chris Albert approached you and said, "I was in a fight with some guys earlier tonight, and here they come."
Yes, and you just said that he was with Tim Albert. I never saw Tim Albert that night.
My mistake. Let's just leave it at Chris.
He was with his fiance.
Okay. So all of this situation emanated from you coming to the aid of Chris Albert, your friend longtime childhood friend, correct?
It had nothing to do with it being Chris Albert.
Isn't it true that it had everything to do with it being Chris Albert?
No,
So just a regular random guy off the street, you would have conducted yourself the exact same way.
absolutely.
Isn't it true that what you actually did, Sergeant Lank, in that particular circumstance, was you came to the aid of a friend and you used your position as a police officer to further that assistance and that protection?
No,
We're splitting hairs here.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Lally?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Splitting hairs. Can we go to sleep now?
Whatever happened between Christopher Albert and these brothers in that particular evening, you weren't present for that?
no,
And your testimony that Tim Albert wasn't present at any point in time when you were there either, correct?
no.
Now, with regard to Tim Albert, what, if any, other involvement have you had with him as far as through your official duties as a police officer?
I was involved in an investigation where we had to take out charges against Tim Albert.
So you've been involved in an investigation where charges were actually taken out against a member of the Albert family, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall roundabout when that was?
I believe it was 2012.
Do you recall who, if anyone, from your department was working with you on that investigation?
It would have been Officer Goode at the time.
And that's now Sergeant Sean Goode, is that correct?
That's correct.
Same Sean Goode involved in this case, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to the federal suit that was brought, that was settled, correct?
That's correct.
There was no disposition on it, no finding of liability or anything of the like.
Correct.
Now, with respect to Brian, how would you describe your relationship with him?
Again, civil.
The two of you friends?
Could you repeat that, please?
Are the two of you friends?
No.
You socialize with Brian Albert, have you at any point in time?
I've been at events where Brian is at, and we will say hello, but that's pretty much the extent of it.
Have you ever socialized with Brian Albert, just the two of you?
No,
You ever been to his house or inside his house?
no,
Now, with regard to, other than that day of January 29th, 2022, correct?
correct.
You and Brian Albert, do you get along?
Say that again?
I said, he and Brian Albert, do they get along?
We have had some disagreements, I'd say, in the past, but we're civil. We get along enough to say hello.
Anything to do with your response, your interviews, or anything to do with January 29th, 2022, have anything to do with the Albert family or Brian Albert or Christopher Albert or anything to do with the Alberts whatsoever?
No,
That didn't change what you were doing, how you were doing it, or how you conducted yourself in this investigation. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Nothing further.
Okay,
I have one slight area to cover with the court's permission.
okay.
Concerning Tim Albert and this issue, or the investigation where charges were brought against Tim Albert, that was a circumstance in which Tim Albert, in broad daylight, slammed into a parked car belonging to a woman and then fled the scene, correct?
No,
Didn't you follow a trail of transmission fluid or something to find where he had gone?
I did.
And he fled directly to 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
He didn't live there. He went to his brother's house. Brian,
No, that's not correct.
he lived there at the time?
Yes,
Okay, so you follow the trail of whatever it is, fluid trail, all the way to where Tim Albert had fled to, and you basically had no choice. He had just slammed into the back of a car and then fled the scene. Isn't that right?
I concluded my investigation by locating the vehicle that had heavy damage.
The vehicle that he hit.
His vehicle.
his vehicle had heavy damage, but so did the vehicle that he hit, correct?
So what you had said a minute ago that he hit a parked car. That's incorrect.
Oh, he hit a moving car.
It was a vehicle that was, I believe it was stopped at a light. It wasn't a parked car. It was a vehicle that was stopped.
Okay. Irrespective of whether the
Splitting
engine
hairs.
was running or parked or not, he hit a car
Yes.
with a woman in it, fled the scene, then you find him trying to hide out at 34 Fairview, correct?
He had parked the car at 34 Fairview.
And you didn't have much choice. I mean, there you have it. The evidence is right in front of you. You can't really cover that one up, right?
I would say I did my
Objection,
job.
Your Honor. Move to strike.
So this is voir dire. Could you answer the question, please?
I would say I did my job.
Okay. Did you engage in any kind of a DUI investigation?
We spoke with him.
Did you give him FSTs?
I don't recall if I did. I know I didn't. I don't recall if Officer Goode did.
Did you give him a breathalyzer?
I did not.
Did you ask him for a blood test?
I did not.
So no DUI investigation was really undertaken, correct?
Again, I can't recall what Officer Goode did, but I was there.
But you didn't do it. You didn't do what I just suggested, a full-blown DUI investigation,
No.
even though he hit another car and then fled the scene.
We spoke with him and he gave an explanation.
And that explanation coming from Tim Albert was, I'm really sorry, I panicked, right?
It was something to that nature.
And he turned around, well, I'll just cut to the chase. Y'all ended up charging him with a misdemeanor, correct?
I believe so.
And he was given diversion
I don't know.
and his record was wiped clean.
I don't know.
That's all I know.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant. You can step down, sir.
Thank you.
I'll hear you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll be very brief. I spoke about the Aguiar case a couple of days ago, and I think it's still attendant to our conversation today or discussion today. That case stands for the proposition that it doesn't matter if the evidence reveals something other than something that's otherwise inadmissible, as long as the material elaborates on or establishes that there could be some sort of bias or prejudice. There doesn't have to be a bias or prejudice. I don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt or to clear and convincing evidence that there's a bias or prejudice. But if the evidence suggests that there could be bias or prejudice, that is proper fodder for the jury to consider, and that's what we're asking. In this case, Sergeant Lank's willingness to activate himself as an officer, get involved with Chris Albert, although it was in 2002, and I know that that's something that Mr. Lally is going to say, and he's going to harp on, this was so long ago, that actually cuts against the Commonwealth case. That shows how long these folks have been involved with each other and how deep their relationships run. For him to sort of deputize himself in that situation in order to help out his longtime friend, whom he socializes with, drinks with, grew up with, establishes a bias and a prejudice, in this case against Miss Reed, and in favor of the Alberts. And it's not like he had a tangential part to play in this, a role to play in this investigation. He was the very first officer to walk in that front door. He absolutely knew what he was going to find when he walked in the front door, which was the homeowners and possibly other witnesses. He engaged in a interview or a series of interviews that were not recorded. I have no idea what was said. The jurors are never going to find out exactly what was said other than to take his word for it. The jurors have to be able to weigh and balance his credibility against an officer that, for instance, even like Sgt Goode, for instance, who seems to come across far more unbiased, just sort of a straight shooter. Sergeant Lank is not that person. He never should have walked in that front door. He should have said to his supervisors, I have a relationship with the Albert family. I've known these folks for too long. I grew up with his brother or brothers. I've known them my whole life. I'm probably not the right person to make the decisions about this investigation. And unless and until the jurors know that and can weigh and balance it, they can toss it out if they want to, or they can adopt it if they want to.
So
If they need need to be able to hear the evidence.
So I have a question for you. So the part about the complaint at the station
Yes.
and being turned away, who are you going to get that in from other than the Lapalito brothers, which puts us a little far afield? So he didn't adopt it or said, I don't know, or that's what I've heard.
So the Lopolito brothers, I think.
I know, but that's so far removed now.
I disagree. I think they're the ones that are closest to the situation. So we would ask who's better to tell the jurors that they walked in. I can get the police report. I can tell the court when it's dated. It's dated September 2nd or September 3rd. And the Lopolitos walked in on August 31st to make the complaint.
No, I understand because you've outlined it, or Ms. Little outlined it, which is very helpful. I don't disagree that some of this is admissible. I just have to figure out how you intend to get it in, because I have to be concerned about if it's a mini trial within a trial, and we're trying to avoid that. If he were to testify as he did, that's what I understand, and the Commonwealth didn't object to that. That seems admissible to me.
I would probably seek to do it with the court's permission through two pieces of evidence. One would be Mark or Alfredo, and I don't think I would use both of them.
You would not.
I would not. Okay, fair enough. I would seek to ask Mark to join us. He would testify to the altercation. He would testify to the complaint, and then I would seek to either get a stipulation to the date of the police reports. I don't even need the police reports in. If I can't get a stipulation, then I probably would just ask the court to be able to establish that the police report is a business record.
So I would like to see those police reports tonight before I leave, okay?
If I have them.
We'd have to get them.
Right. I will do my best to get them to the court. I can't get them to the court tonight. We don't have them.
Okay.
So I'll start working on that immediately.
All right. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Lally?
Your Honor, I would submit that defendant has him at his burn. There is no actual relevancy to any of this, and it is essentially a trial within a trial at this point. Bringing in other civilian witnesses to talk about an incident which happened 22 years ago to
So
involving...
let's forget about bringing in the civilian witnesses. How about what we heard as to what Sergeant Lank would testify to?
As to what Sergeant Lank would testify to is a single incident in which he did not witness anything to do with the Albert brothers. Christopher Albert was never at 34 Fairview Road on January 28th or until much later in the day of January 29th, and certainly not at the same time that Sergeant Lank was. I think counsel far overestimates what Sergeant Lank's involvement in this particular investigation was. He shows up on scene, he assists with the other officers, Lieutenant Gallagher and Sergeant Goode that you've already heard
was
from.
in writing.
And with respect to, he takes a couple of initial statements, all those witnesses then subsequently talked to troopers from the state police, testified grand jury, multiple grand juries, and will all be testifying as witnesses in this case. So any purported bias from an incident from 22 years ago involving a brother who wasn't even present at the home on the night in question does nothing but confuse the jury as to what the issues are, and creating this sort of bias out of thin cloth that has no basis whatsoever in the facts of this case.
Okay, so I disagree with you. I don't know yet. I want to see those police reports. I don't know yet what I'm going to allow in, but I disagree that it has nothing to do. If it weren't involving the Alberts, then under the grand jury case, the decision by Justice Gantz, Chief Justice Gantz at the time, it wouldn't come in, but it does. So it comes in for different purposes or different reasons. So I'd like those reports tonight, or certainly by tomorrow morning before we come out.
We'll do our best.
Okay. All right. So we'll figure this out tomorrow morning. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All rise, please.
Wow. Let me find the right button. There's that fan. Oh my gosh. There's that fan. Okay. Well, 2 hours and 9 minutes in, and I didn't have to go and disappear. So, okay, that's some interesting stuff. That ending part a juror would not hear. It was out of the presence of the jury. I'm looking at my notes. And I'm reading my notes too. Long afternoon. And I agree that the history with the Alberts does tend toward bias. Because if I remember correctly, Sergeant Lank, and it's such an unusual name, I've never heard that before. If I heard it right, earlier with Sgt Goode, who went into the residence with Sergeant Lank, who basically volunteered himself to be part of this. It's the impression I got. Or Goode brought him in. Anyway, the two of them went into the residence. Goode kind of took a step back and let Lank do the questioning of Brian and Nicole, and didn't write anything down. There's no actual report of what was spoken or discussed. And anytime the defense tried to get Goode to say, was this asked? He didn't ask for the answer. He asked if it was asked. They couldn't even get that in there. So Lank is the one we need to hear from as to what was told to him. And there's no written report to confirm or verify anything. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. So I see where they're coming from there. And because of the situation of bias, and they had to do a voidere to see A, what he would testify to, and B, what the record was of the incident that they feel establishes bias. I'm not an attorney. I don't know this stuff. I'm just me, just a snarky juror. There's a little bit of snark going on from the judge, from the defense, not from the Commonwealth. He doesn't seem snarky. He's just wah, 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 wah. So they will be in court again tomorrow morning for day 6. And I may be doing something tomorrow, so it'll be a while before I can get to share whatever I think I know, which isn't much. So we'll let it go here, and we will we'll end it here. And so until I see you later, we'll say bye for now. Bye. And wrong button.